The night my daughter asked me why I was crying in my sleep, I almost told her the truth. I almost said, because there is a room in a house 2 hours from here that is exactly my shape and exactly my temperature. And every night at 2:11 a.m. I can still feel it waiting. But she was 4. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with the small, uncomplicated face of someone who believes adults cry for the same reasons children do a bad dream. A stubbed toe, a thing that can be fixed with a glass of water and a hug. So I said I'd had a bad dream, and she accepted it, and she went back to her cereal. My partner, Lee, was less easily satisfied. She stood at the counter with her coffee and watched me the way she'd been watching me for 6 weeks, carefully, patiently, with the particular attention of someone cataloging symptoms she doesn't yet have a diagnosis for. She didn't ask. She'd stopped asking after the first 2 weeks, when every answer I gave her was technically true and functionally useless. I'm fine. I'm tired. The house was a lot of work. I'm just adjusting. All true, all useless. The real answer was something I couldn't give her because I didn't have language for it yet, and I'm not sure I have language for it now. But I'm going to try, because the alternative is silence, and silence is what my mother chose. And silence didn't protect anyone. It just delayed things. My name is Colleen Merrifield Watts. In the spring of last year, I inherited a house I'd never been inside, from a grandmother I hadn't seen since I was 8, in a town I'd never visited. The house was in Ashfield, Massachusetts, a small rural community in the western part of the state where the hills are steep and the trees are dense and the roads get narrower the further you drive from the highway, as though civilization is being gradually edited out of the landscape. My grandmother, Estelle Merrifield, had died in a nursing facility at 91. The attorney who contacted me said the property needed work before it could be listed for sale, and asked whether I wanted to hire a contractor or handle it myself. I am a contractor, or I was. For 11 years, I ran a small residential renovation company out of Northampton, specializing in older homes, colonials, federals, Victorians, the kind of houses that require someone who understands plaster and lath and knob and tube wiring and the particular structural logic of buildings erected before anyone had heard of a load-bearing calculation. I was good at it. I liked the work because it was honest. You could see what was broken, you could measure it, you could fix it, and when you were done, the thing that had been failing was now sound. There was a clarity to renovation that I found deeply satisfying, a sense that problems, no matter how old or deeply embedded, could be understood and addressed if you were patient enough and skilled enough and willing to strip things down to the bones. So I told the attorney I'd handle it myself. Lee was cautious. "You don't owe a dead woman your spring," she said, not unkindly, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with Nora on her lap, both of them watching me with expressions that were more similar than either of them would have appreciated the same steady, evaluating gaze, the same slight tilt of the head. But she didn't stop me, because she understood the other thing driving this decision, the thing beneath the professional logic. My mother had severed contact with her own mother when I was 8. She'd never explained why. She'd never mentioned the house, or Ashfield, or anything about her childhood beyond the barest facts she'd grown up in western Massachusetts. She'd had siblings. She'd left home young. When she died in 2019, she left no reconciliation, no letter, no instructions regarding her mother. Just silence, passed to me like a gene I didn't ask to carry. And now there was a house, a physical place where the silence had originated, a door I could walk through and maybe understand what my mother had walked away from. Lee saw all of this in my face and said, "Just come home on weekends." I brought my crew. Thomas had worked with me for 4 years, a quiet, precise man in his late 40s, who communicated primarily through the quality of his work and occasional dry observations that landed like perfectly placed nails. He could look at a sagging joist and tell you within a quarter-inch how far it had deflected, and he could look at a person and tell you with similar accuracy how far they'd drifted from their own good judgment. His girlfriend, Andy, asked to come along to handle the cleaning and cosmetic prep. Andy was 32, direct, funny, and had a habit of narrating her own actions under her breath like a cooking show host, describing her life in real time. She once spent 20 minutes scrubbing a windowsill while murmuring, "And now we're going to really get into this corner, because this corner has been neglected and it knows it, and we're going to show this corner that someone cares." She made the mundane feel like an act of love, which is a quality I valued more than I knew at the time. The fourth member of our group was Bryn, a 22-year-old apprentice I'd hired out of a trades program 6 months earlier. Bryn was building a portfolio and documented everything. With her phone, she had a genuine eye for composition, for finding the frame that showed you both the decay and the beauty simultaneously, the crack in the plaster and the light pouring through it. She was smart, capable, and fearless in the way that young people are fearless before they've learned that understanding something doesn't make you safe from it. We drove up on a Monday in early April. The last 20 minutes of the drive were on roads that deteriorated steadily. Pavement to packed dirt to gravel to what was really just 2 tire tracks through a corridor of bare maple and birch. The branches still winter-stripped and clicking together overhead in the wind with a sound like someone shuffling a deck of cards very slowly. A farm stand at the junction with Route 112 was shuttered and padlocked. A hand-lettered sign advertising last September's apples still propped against the door. Everything past the pavement felt like it was running 6 months behind the rest of the world, operating on a different calendar, a different clock. Even the light seemed older out here, thinner, more tentative, as though it had traveled further to reach this particular stretch of road. The house appeared the way large things sometimes do in dense woods all at once, occupying a space that a second ago was just trees. It was bigger than the photographs the attorney had sent. A Victorian structure, asymmetrical, steep-gabled, with a wraparound porch that sagged at its eastern corner like a tired lower lip. The paint had gone from whatever it once was to a uniform gray that wasn't a color so much as the absence of one, the visual equivalent of a held breath. 3 stories if you counted the attic. A turret on the southwest corner gave it a faintly ecclesiastical quality, as though it couldn't decide whether it was a house or a small church. The windows, dozens of them, all different sizes and shapes, round and rectangular and arched, reflected the overcast April sky so uniformly that the house appeared to have no interior at all. Just gray glass and gray wood, and the gray light pressing against it from every direction, as though the sky and the house were made of the same material. Tomas parked the truck and sat looking at it for a moment. "That's a lot of house," he said, in the neutral tone he uses when he's calculating how much work something will actually be versus how much the client thinks it will be. Andy leaned forward from the back seat. "It looks like it's been holding its breath," she said. Bryn was already out of the truck, phone up, photographing. I sat in the passenger seat with the folder of documents the attorney had given me. Inside was a property deed, an insurance certificate, a survey from 1987, and a handwritten list in my grandmother's script, careful, upright, old-fashioned letters pressed firmly into the paper. A numbered inventory of rooms, 1 through 22, with brief descriptions beside each. Parlor, kitchen, library, sewing room, morning room, nursery. The handwriting was steady and consistent until the last entry, room 22, which was labeled simply, "Locked." The pen had pressed harder there, not as though the hand had trembled, but as though it had hesitated and then committed, the way you press harder when you're writing something you wish you didn't have to write. I noticed it. I folded the list and put it in my back pocket and got out of the truck. The first 2 days were assessment and early work. We walked every room, tested floors, checked the electrical panel, ran water in every fixture. The house was in the condition you'd expect from a property maintained by an elderly woman who hadn't renovated since the mid-1980s, neglected cosmetically, but structurally remarkable. The bones were extraordinary. Original chestnut banisters with hand-carved newel posts. Quarter-sawn oak floors darkened to the color of strong tea. Plaster walls with barely a crack, still smooth after more than a century. Crown molding so precisely fitted you couldn't slide a piece of paper into the joints. Whoever built this house in 1891 had built it with the conviction that it would outlast everyone who lived in it, and they'd been right. The neglect was all surface. Wallpaper peeling in long, slow strips, like skin after a sunburn. Water stains on ceilings that mapped old leaks in shapes resembling continents. A kitchen last updated when avocado green was a color people chose on purpose, with a refrigerator that hummed at a pitch slightly too high, like a singer straining for a note just past her range. But it was livable. The furnace lit on the third try and settled into a steady, reliable rhythm. The water ran brown, then rust orange, then cold and clear. Tomas found raccoons in the attic, a mother, and 3 kits nested in a steamer trunk packed with moth-eaten blankets. He spent nearly an hour coaxing them out through a propped window, speaking to them in a calm, continuous stream of English and Spanish, explaining the ownership change as though they were reasonable tenants who deserved proper notice. Bryn laughed until she cried. Andy narrated the entire operation in a stage whisper from the doorway. I stood at the top of the attic stairs and watched my crew being easy and funny and good with each other. And I thought, remember this. Remember what it feels like when a house is just a house and the people in it are just people. I didn't know why I thought that. I know now. We set up in the second-floor bedrooms. Mine was the largest, facing west, with a bay window overlooking a meadow that ran downhill into trees. The meadow was still winter brown, but the earliest green was showing through in patches, like a promise being kept reluctantly. The wallpaper in my room was a repeating pattern of small blue flowers faded to what I'd describe as the memory of blue, not the color itself, but the impression it leaves behind. I liked the room. I set up my sleeping bag on the old bed, stood at the window, watched the light fail over the meadow, and felt the quiet satisfaction of being inside the story my mother had refused to tell me. The work proceeded. We stripped wallpaper, mapped electrical systems, assessed plumbing. Tomas and I debated knob and tube wiring preservation versus replacement. Bryn photographed everything methodically, a warped floorboard buckled into the shape of a frozen wave, a cracked window with light streaming through the fracture lines like a stained glass improvisation. Andy cleaned with a thoroughness that bordered on devotion, starting with the kitchen and radiating outward. In the pantry, she found canned goods from the early 2000s, peaches, green beans, condensed milk, and arranged them by expiration date on the counter, a small archive of someone's diminishing appetite. She held up a jar of crystallized honey and said, "This is probably still good. Honey doesn't go bad, it just gets patient." I wrote that down in my notebook because it felt like it described more than honey. At night, we cooked together in the kitchen, ate at the farmhouse table, a piece of furniture so massive it must have been built inside the room, and talked about the house with the enthusiasm of people working on something beautiful, what it could become, what it must have been. I'd run my fingers over the table's scarred surface and wonder which marks my mother had made, eating dinner here as a child in a house she would one day leave without looking back. On the third evening, I pulled out my grandmother's room list and walked the house to match her numbers to the actual spaces. First floor, parlor, dining room, kitchen, mudroom, library. A room I particularly loved, still lined floor to ceiling with books that smelled like vanilla and slow decay. A small east-facing morning room with one armchair and a side table, a study with a roll-top desk and a wall of framed photographs, and a bathroom modernized in pink tile sometime in the 1970s. Second floor, 4 bedrooms, a linen closet large enough to qualify as a room with its own window, a sewing room with a treadle machine still threaded with white cotton, a second bathroom, and a nursery containing an iron crib and a rocking chair so old the wood had silvered to a metallic sheen. Third floor, 2 bedrooms, a storage room of trunks and boxes, and the attic running the full length of the house, 21 rooms. The list said 22. The last entry, locked. I walked the second floor again, counting doors this time instead of rooms. At the end of the hallway, past the nursery, There was a door I'd walked past at least 4 times and mentally categorized as a closet each time. It was narrower than the bedroom doors, maybe 26 inches, and painted the same faded cream as the hallway wall, so that your eye slid over it the way your eye slides over anything that doesn't want to be noticed. The brass knob was tarnished to near black. When I closed my hand around it, I pulled back. It was warm. Not room temperature, warmer. The kind of warm that makes you test it again to be sure, pressing your palm flat against the wood the way you'd press the back of your hand to a child's forehead. The door was warm, the way skin is warm, the way something with a pulse is warm. I tried the 7 keys the attorney had given me. None fit. I tried turning the knob harder. Locked. "Probably just a closet," Thomas said when I mentioned it at breakfast. "Your grandmother was 91. Maybe she counted closets." Reasonable. I accepted it. I made a note to remove the door from its hinges when we reached that phase of the renovation, and I went back to work. That night I woke at 2:11 a.m. because the house was making a sound I hadn't heard before. Not the creaking I'd already cataloged. Every old house has a vocabulary of nighttime complaints. Wood adjusting to temperature. Joists settling under their own memory of weight. This was different. A low, sustained hum, more felt than heard, as though someone had struck a tuning fork the size of the house and pressed its base against the frame. It was in the walls, in the floor under my sleeping bag, in the glass of the bay window. It rose and fell in a rhythm too regular to be wind and too organic to be mechanical. A breathing rhythm, except breathing implies lungs, and this felt larger, more distributed, as though the entire structure were respiring through its wood and plaster and stone. I lay still for 14 minutes. Then it stopped, and the silence that followed was so abrupt and so total that it felt active, and not the absence of sound, but the suppression of it, the way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has simultaneously decided not to speak. I looked down the hallway toward room 22. The door was just visible at the far end, a slightly different shade of dark than the wall beside it. I watched it for a long time. Nothing moved. I went back to sleep and dreamed about the door, except in the dream it was wider, nearly normal-sized, and the paint around it was wet and fresh, and I understood in the logic of the dream that someone had just sealed it again, moments ago, and the paint was still drying because the thing behind it had almost gotten the door open. I didn't tell the others about the sound. I told myself it was professional restraint. You don't chase every noise in an old house or you'll never finish a job. But the honest reason was worse. I wanted the sound to be mine. I wanted this mystery to belong to me the way the house now belonged to me. There was possessiveness in my silence, an eagerness I mistook for curiosity, and I can see now that the possessiveness was the first thing about my feelings that wasn't entirely my own. On the 4th day, I was stripping wallpaper in the nursery when I found writing underneath. Not on the wallpaper, on the plaster itself, in small, careful pencil marks hidden behind the paper layer. "She gets so much louder when there are more of us." I stopped, read it again. The handwriting was rounder and younger than my grandmother's upright script. I photographed it and kept stripping. Under the next panel, "Maman says it's the pipes, but there are no pipes on this wall." I checked, and near the corner by the window frame, "The locked room is warm today." I put my hand on the door and it was like putting my hand on a sleeping animal. You can feel something on the other side, not moving, just being. The cold contraction in my chest wasn't fear. It was recognition, the specific, unsettling recognition of discovering that someone has already mapped the territory you thought you were exploring alone. Someone had heard the hum. Someone had touched the warm door. Someone had stood in this hallway decades ago and noticed exactly what I was noticing, and they had written it down in pencil on a wall and covered it with flowers. I called the attorney that afternoon and asked about the house's previous occupants. He checked records. My grandmother had inherited the house from her mother-in-law in 1961. Before that, it had been in the Merrifield family since construction. My grandmother had raised 3 children here. My mother, Catherine, born 1958, an uncle named Paul, born 1955, and an aunt, Estelle Jr., born 1961. What happened to Estelle Jr.? I asked. She passed at the property in March 1984, age 23. The death certificate lists cardiac arrest. And Paul? A pause, paper shuffling. Paul Merrifield, deceased August 1981 at the same property, age 26, also cardiac arrest. 2 children, both young, both dead in this house, both cardiac arrest. Was there ever an investigation? I asked. The probate records don't indicate one. I can check county files if you'd like, but these are over 40 years old. I thanked him and hung up. I sat on the porch steps and looked at the house from outside and thought about what it means when 2 young people die of heart failure in the same building, 4 decades apart from medical advances, but 3 years apart from each other, and nobody investigates, and nobody leaves, and nobody talks about it ever again. That evening at dinner I told the others. I put my phone on the table and showed them the photographs of the wall writing. Bryn zoomed in, fascinated. Thomas ate steadily and didn't look. Andy studied the images for a long time, then set the phone down and looked at the kitchen walls with the expression of someone recalculating every surface around her. "Who wrote it?" she asked. "My aunt, Estelle Jr. She died in this house in 1984, at 23, cardiac arrest. My uncle Paul died here 3 years before that, same cause, same age range." The table went silent. Outside, wind moved through the bare maples, and the branches scraped the siding with a sound like fingernails testing whether a surface would hold. "And the locked room," Bryn said. "That's connected. I think it's a room that hasn't been opened since 1984, I said. "I think we need to open it." Thomas set his fork down with care, aligning it precisely with the edge of his plate, the way he aligns everything with intention, with the small, deliberate control of a man who manages his unease through physical exactness. "Colleen, I've worked with you 4 years. You're the most level-headed person I know. If you tell me to open a door, I open it. But I want to say something." He looked at me directly. "This house is a job. It's your family's house and it's a job. It is not therapy. Whatever your family didn't tell you, there might be a good reason they didn't tell you. Some reasons deserve respect." Andy put her hand on his arm, not to stop him to agree. He was right. He was right in a way I felt in my stomach, heavy and settled, the weight of someone else's good judgment pressing against my own momentum. But the curiosity was already past the point where wisdom could reach it. I'd found words on a wall written by a dead woman I'd never known existed, describing a sound I'd heard 3 nights ago in the same hallway where she'd pressed her hand against the same warm door. The gap in my story wasn't just a gap anymore. It had a shape, a temperature, and a voice that spoke at 2:11 a.m. The next morning, I removed the door from its hinges. It took over an hour. The hinges were standard Victorian cast iron, 3 per side, but they'd been painted over so many times the paint had formed a seal nearly as hard as the metal itself. I chiseled through it layer by layer, reading the colors like tree rings. White, cream, pale green, white again, a deep, institutional gray. Each layer was a decade or more of someone choosing to seal this door a little more thoroughly, a little more permanently. The final layer, the one matching the hallway wall, the one that rendered the door nearly invisible, was thick even, and couldn't have been more than 10 years old. My grandmother, in her 80s, possibly already in the early stages of the cognitive decline that would put her in a nursing home, had stood in this hallway with a brush and a can of paint and sealed this door one final time. Not because she'd forgotten the room was there, because she remembered exactly what was behind it and wanted one more layer between it and the world. When the last hinge pin came free and the door shifted in my hands, the room exhaled. I don't use that word figuratively. A breath of air came through the widening gap, blood-warm and dense, carrying a smell I can only describe as interior, not rot, not mold, not the stale dust of an unused space. but something more intimate. The smell of a room that has been breathing its own air for 40 years, recycling it, warming it, keeping it alive the way a body keeps its internal temperature stable. It smelled the way the inside of a sleeping person's cupped hand smells close, organic, startlingly private, as though I'd opened something that was never meant to be opened from the outside. Thomas was behind me. I heard him step back. "Jesus," he said quietly. I leaned the door against the hallway wall and shone my work light inside. The room was small, 8 by 10 feet, maybe less. One window on the far wall, boarded from the inside with planks nailed directly into the frame, sealing out all light. A wooden chair. A small table with an empty drinking glass, faintly clouded. A narrow bed with a bare mattress stained in patterns that didn't suggest water. And the walls. Every wall, floor to ceiling, including the back of the door I'd removed and the boards over the window, and even the ceiling itself, covered in writing. Dense, small, meticulous ink. Not the scattered pencil notes from the nursery, but something comprehensive, sustained, obsessive. A woman writing on every available surface because she had run out of paper or because paper wasn't permanent enough and she needed her words to become part of the structure itself. I stepped inside. The air closed around me the way water closes over a swimmer, not cold, not hostile, but complete, filling every space I offered it. Bryn appeared in the doorway. I heard her sharp breath. The first passage I read was at eye level near the doorframe. She asks me to stay, and I stay. She asks me to write, and I write. She says the house needs a record, and I am the record. She says the house is not the walls. The house is the people who know it, and I know it best. I know it best. I know it. Further along, near the boarded window. Maman sealed the door, but I asked her to, and she did because I asked. I didn't ask to leave. I asked to be sealed in. The house is better when it is closed. The house is better when we stay. "Colleen," Bryn said from the doorway. "I know. Someone lived in here." "My aunt," I said. "My aunt sealed herself in this room, and my grandmother helped her." On the north wall, in writing that had shifted from controlled to sprawling over what must have been months or years, "Maman understands now. Maman can hear her too. The house wants to be full, and we are not enough. Tell Catherine to bring her children. Tell Catherine to come home. Catherine, my mother, who severed contact and moved 3 states away and burned every bridge back to this place and died without mentioning her sister or her brother or this house or this room. Not because of a family argument, not because of an old grudge, because of an invitation she refused so completely that she erased even the memory of being asked. I sat on the floor of that room and read the walls. Bryn stayed in the doorway, photographing methodically, not speaking. Thomas left. Andy left with him. I read for almost 3 hours while the April light shifted through the rest of the house and never reached this room, because this room had no light of its own. Only the warm, dense, breathing dark that my aunt had chosen over everything else. What I reconstructed was this. Estelle Jr. began hearing the hum in her late teens. She described it as the house communicating not in words, but in pressure, the way an infant communicates hunger through urgency and proximity, and the sheer insistence of need expressed from inside the same space you occupy. The house wanted her attention, her presence, her acknowledgement that it was not merely a structure, but something that had accumulated a kind of awareness over a century of continuous habitation, absorbing the warmth and sound and emotion of every person who had lived inside it, until it had enough of those things to want more. She wrote about the feeling the way people write about religious experience, with awe and gratitude, and the terrifying clarity of someone who believes she has been chosen for something she doesn't fully understand, but knows she cannot refuse. She described feeling loved intensely by something that couldn't express it in language, only in warmth, in the hum, in a sense of rightness when she was inside the house, and a physical, nauseating wrongness when she stepped outside. as though leaving the property created a vacuum inside her chest that only returning could fill. Over months, the requests became specific. The house didn't want her in the house. It wanted her in one room, the smallest room, the room closest to what she called the center. She began spending nights there, then days. Then she asked her mother to lock the door, and she described the request as relief. The sudden, flooding comfort of finally setting down something heavy you've carried so long you'd forgotten it had weight. And then the writing turned outward, away from her experience and toward us, the family. She wrote lists of names: her mother, her brother Paul, her sister Catherine, with numbers beside each that I couldn't decipher. Beside her own name, the number was the highest. Beside my mother's, 0. "She won't come," my aunt wrote near the baseboard. "Catherine won't come, and the house knows. Catherine has made herself empty to it. But she has a daughter. The house is patient. Someone always comes." The last entry was dated March 17th, 1984, written on the ceiling above the bed, my aunt lying on her back, writing upward, ink occasionally dripping onto the mattress below. "My chest hurts. I think this is what full feels like. I think this is what it means to be enough." I left the room. I went downstairs. Thomas was at the farmhouse table with coffee he wasn't drinking, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, the way he listens to a client describe a problem completely, patiently, and with the focus of someone who is already planning what to do. When I finished, he said, "We leave. Today. Now. The job isn't finished. Colleen, your aunt died in that room. Your uncle died in this house. Both young, both cardiac arrest. And your mother ran so hard from this place, she amputated her entire family rather than let you know it existed. This is not a renovation. I don't know what this is. But we leave." "One more day," I said. "I need to check one more thing." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen. Not fear, but something more precise. The look of someone watching a person they care about step toward a ledge, calculating whether reaching for her arm will steady her or send her over. "One day," he said. "Then I drive home, and I take Andy." I agreed. Bryn said she'd stay with me. Thomas looked at her and then at me, and I could see him weighing whether to argue, whether to refuse, whether to pick us both up and carry us to the truck. He didn't. He trusted me. That trust is something I still think about, because I was not, at that point, entirely trustworthy, and some part of him knew it, and he trusted me anyway. That's the cruelest thing about what the house does. It doesn't just affect you, it affects the people who believe in you enough to let you make your own decisions. That night, the hum returned, clearer than before, not louder but more articulate, as though removing the door had removed a filter. And the sound that came through now had shape and texture and cadence. The cadence of speech. Not words, but the emotional architecture of sentences, questions, reassurances, requests, the way you can follow a conversation in a language you don't speak if you listen to the rise and fall instead of the meaning. I lay in bed and listened and felt something I didn't want to feel. Something warm and total, settling into my chest the way the hum settled into the walls, filling a space I hadn't known was empty. I felt like I had come home, and I knew even then that the feeling wasn't mine. Thomas and Andy left before dawn. I heard them moving through the house in the gray pre-light footsteps, quick and deliberate, the particular rhythm of people who have made a decision and don't want to leave room for reconsideration. Coolers dragging across the kitchen floor, bags zipping. The low murmur of Andy's voice, not the playful narration I was used to, but something tighter, compressed. The voice of a woman convincing herself that leaving is the right thing even when it means leaving people behind. I didn't go downstairs. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened to them withdraw the way you listen to a tide going out, the slow subtraction of presence, the exposure of what was underneath all along. Tomas came to my door. He didn't step inside. He stood in the hallway with his jacket zipped and his keys in his hand and looked at me with the same expression from the night before, that precise calculation of risk and trust. Colleen, I'll be in Northampton. Call me when you're ready and I'll come get you. I know. Call me today, not tomorrow. Okay. He looked past me at the bay window, where the first light was defining the meadow in slow degrees, and then he looked the other direction, down the hallway toward room 22 standing open at the far end, its door still leaning against the wall where I'd left it. His jaw tightened. He turned and went downstairs without another word, and I heard the truck start, and the gravel crunch, and the sound of the engine diminish down the long drive until it was gone. And then there were two of us in a 22-room house that had spent 40 years waiting for someone to come back. Bryn made coffee on the old stove. She was quiet, in a way that was unusual for her. Bryn was normally a processor, someone who thought by talking, who worked through uncertainty by putting language around it. Her silence told me she'd heard the hum, too. I didn't ask. I didn't want confirmation because confirming it would mean the sound wasn't something the house was doing to me alone, and I wasn't ready to give up the private relationship I'd begun to build with whatever was reaching out from those walls. That sentence, written now, disturbs me more than anything else in this account. I was protecting my relationship with the thing that had killed my aunt, and it felt natural. It felt like discretion. We drank our coffee at the farmhouse table and I laid out the day's plan. Not renovation, research. I wanted to go through the house systematically and find everything my grandmother had hidden, sealed, painted over, or locked away. If my aunt had covered an entire room in writing and left notes on the nursery walls, there might be more. Journals, letters, photographs. Anything that could tell me what had actually happened in this family between 1984 and the day my grandmother left for the nursing home. Bryn nodded. I'll take the 3rd floor and attic. You take the 2nd floor and the room. Not room 22. Not your aunt's room. Not the locked room. She said the room, the way you say the sun or the road. The definite article applied to something singular, as though every other room in the house had become subordinate to it. I started in the 1st floor study, the one with the roll-top desk and the wall of framed photographs. I'd glanced at the photographs during the assessment, but hadn't studied them. Now I did. They were arranged chronologically, left to right, spanning what appeared to be the complete history of the house. The earliest was a formal portrait from the 1890s, a man and woman on the porch. The house behind them so new the wood looked pale and raw, the paint not yet applied, the bones of the building still visible in a way that made it look skeletal, unfinished, hungry. Then decades of family photographs, children, gatherings, holidays, each one slightly more casual than the last as photography moved from event to habit. I found my grandmother in the 1960s, a tall woman with dark hair and a direct gaze, standing in the garden with 3 small children. The oldest, a boy, was Paul. The middle child, a girl with my mother's jawline, was Catherine. The youngest, a toddler on my grandmother's hip, was Estelle Jr. I followed Estelle Jr. across the wall. She appeared throughout the 60s and 70s, growing from a round-faced baby into a thin, serious teenager with her mother's dark hair, and an expression I can only describe as attentive, but not attentive to the camera, not attentive to the people around her. In every photograph, she was looking at something just outside the frame, a wall, a doorway, a window, a corner of a room, as though she were in constant, quiet conversation with the house itself, and the camera had caught her mid-sentence every time. The last photograph of her was from what I estimated to be the early 1980s. She was sitting in the morning room chair, the east-facing one, and she was smiling. Not at the camera, at the wall. Her face held an expression of such complete, peaceful contentment that it looked almost devotional. She looked like a woman in love. I opened the roll-top desk. Beneath the ordinary paperwork, bills, insurance forms, decades of accumulated bureaucracy, I found a locked drawer. The 3rd key on the attorney's ring opened it. Inside was a notebook, small, leather-bound. The pages yellowed and stiff, The leather cracked along the spine from repeated opening. My grandmother's handwriting. It was not a diary. It was a log. Dated entries, terse and precise, spanning 1979 to 2015. Each entry recorded a date, a time, and a single word. Active or quiet. Occasionally a note followed, never more than a sentence. March 3rd, 1979, 2:11 a.m. Active. E heard it first. March 4th, 1979, 2:11 a.m. Active. Longer tonight. E says it is asking. March 5th, 1979. Quiet. E upset. Says the silence is worse. Always 2:11 a.m. Every active entry, without exception, for 36 years. Whatever the house did, it did at 2:11. I read forward through the years, watching patterns form. Active periods lasting days or weeks, followed by quiet stretches. During active periods, the notes grew detailed and anxious. During quiet periods, they were sparse and tense with waiting. The hum was not constant. It came and went. And each time it returned, my grandmother noted it was slightly louder, slightly longer, slightly more directional. April the 12th, 1980, 2:11 a.m. Active. East wall of the second floor hallway. June 1st, 1981, 2:11 a.m. Active. E says it has moved, coming from inside room 22 now. August 14th, 1981. Paul arrived home this evening. Did not tell me he was coming. He says he could hear it in California. Paul, my uncle. The man who'd left in 1977 and come back 4 years later because the sound had followed him across a continent. August 15th, 1981, 2:11 a.m. Active. Louder than ever before. Paul is standing in the hallway. He is smiling. He looks the way E looks. August 16th, 1981. Paul has not left the second floor since yesterday morning. August 19th, 1981. Paul is in the room with E. He says it is better with two. He says the house is happier with two. August 22nd, 1981. I found Paul on the floor of the room this morning. He is not breathing. His face is... The entry stopped mid-sentence. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. September 12th, 1981. I buried Paul beside the oak behind the garden. I cannot explain his death to anyone because I cannot explain it to myself. His heart stopped. He was 26. His face, when I found him, was not afraid. He looked full. He looked like E looks when she is writing. He looked like someone who had been given everything they ever needed all at once and their body could not hold it. I set the notebook down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from vertigo. The feeling of looking down into a depth you didn't know existed beneath you and realizing you've been walking over it your entire life. My grandmother had buried her own son behind the house, alone, without telling anyone, without investigation, without ceremony, without any of the structures human beings have built to process death. She had carried him out of that room and put him in the ground, and then she had gone back inside and continued her log. September the 13th, 1981, 2:11 a.m. Active. Quieter tonight, as if satisfied. I kept reading. After Paul's death, my grandmother's entries became sparser but more deliberate. She recorded the hum's activity with the steady, emotionless precision of a lighthouse keeper logging weather, not because she wanted to, but because someone had to. She began noting something new. Temperatures. She measured the temperature of the hallway outside room 22 with what she described as a kitchen thermometer, and recorded it alongside each active entry. The numbers rose gradually over the years. 72 degrees in 1982, 74 in 1983, 76 by early 1984, as though the room were slowly metabolizing something, generating heat from a process that had no mechanical source. Then March 1984. The entries I'd been dreading. March 12th, 1984, 2:11 a.m. Active. E has stopped writing. She sits in the chair and hums along with it. The sound she makes and the sound it makes are the same sound. March 14th, 1984. E has not eaten in 3 days. I bring food. She doesn't see it. March 15th, 1984. I knocked on the door frame. There is no door now. She asked me to remove it, and E looked at me. She said, "Maman, I'm almost done. It's almost enough." I asked her what was almost enough. She said, "Me." March 17th, 1984. E is lying on the bed. Her breathing is the same rhythm as the hum. They are synchronized. Her skin is very warm. March 18th, 1984. E is gone. The room is warm. I have sealed the door. Temperature, 81 degrees. Nothing for 11 months. Then, February 6th, 1985, 2:11 a.m. Active. It is back. E is gone and Paul is gone, but it is back. Temperature, 71 degrees. It is starting over. And this continued. For 30 more years. My grandmother alone in this house, recording the hum, measuring the temperature, sealing the door with a new coat of paint every few years, maintaining her vigil with the grim, solitary discipline of someone who has accepted a duty she can neither fulfill nor abandon. She didn't leave. She didn't sell the house. She didn't call for help. She stayed because leaving meant leaving the house to find someone else. And she believed, I think she was right to believe, that her presence, her willingness to listen to the hum without answering it, without walking toward the room, without giving the house what it wanted, was the only thing keeping it contained. The last entry was from 2015, the year she was moved to the nursing home. The handwriting was barely legible, the letters collapsing into each other like structures failing under their own weight. 2:11 a.m. active, louder than it has ever been. Temperature 79. I think it knows I am leaving. I think it has been patient because I was here, and patience was enough while I was here. But I am leaving, and it will not be patient anymore. It will call for Catherine. Catherine will not come. But Catherine has a daughter. The house remembers that Catherine has a daughter. Beneath this, in pencil so faint I had to tilt the page to catch the light, written on the inside of the back cover as though it were a private postscript, a whisper meant for whoever found the notebook next. It is not malicious. I want to be clear about that. It is not cruel, and it is not evil, and it does not hate. It is a house. It was built to be lived in. It was built to be full. And when it was empty, it learned to ask. And when asking didn't work, it learned to want. And when wanting wasn't enough, it learned to need. And the need is so large now that it has become the house itself. The wood is the need. The walls are the need. The hum is the need saying, please. I have listened to it say please for 36 years, and I have never once heard it say anything else. I do not know how to hate something that can only say please. I do not know how to save anyone from something that can only love them. I closed the notebook. I put it in my bag. I sat at my grandmother's desk in my grandmother's study in my grandmother's house, and I pressed my palms flat against the wood, and I felt the warmth in the desk, in the walls, in the floor, in the air itself. The warmth that had no furnace, no source, no explanation except the one that was written on every surface of room 22, in the handwriting of a woman who had let it fill her until her heart couldn't hold anymore. I found Bryn in the attic. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a box of papers in her lap and an expression I didn't like, not fear, but the deep absorbed concentration of someone listening to something while pretending to read. "What did you find?" I asked. She held up a bundle of envelopes. "Letters. From Paul. Your uncle." The envelopes were addressed to the house in blocky, masculine handwriting. "He left in 1977. Moved to San Diego. These are from the first few years." I took them, about 20 letters, spanning 1977 to 1981. The early ones were ordinary new job, apartment, California weather, the cheerful reports of a young man building a life far from home. But starting in 1979, they shifted. "Is it still happening?" he wrote. "Has it gotten worse? I need to know because I can still feel it. Even here, even 2,000 miles away. I wake up at 2:11 every night and I swear I can hear it through the walls of an apartment that was built in 1965. and has no wood older than 20 years. Then, 1980. I went to a doctor. He says nothing is wrong with me, but something is wrong with me because I'm hearing it here, in San Diego, in a building with no history, and it sounds like home, and I want to go home, and I know the wanting is not mine. I know it, the way you know a voice on the phone isn't the person, but a recording of the person. It sounds right, but it isn't coming from where it should be coming from. The last letter, 1981. I'm coming home. I've tried not to, and I can't anymore. The wanting is bigger than I am. It fills up every room I walk into. Every building I enter feels wrong, feels cold, feels empty in a way that has nothing to do with furniture. Don't tell Catherine. She'll try to stop me, and she'll be right, but it won't matter. I looked at Bryn. Paul came home in August 1981. He was dead within a week. Bryn said nothing. She was looking at the letters, but she wasn't reading them. She was listening. I could see it in her posture, the slight forward tilt, the unfocused eyes, the stillness of someone whose attention has been redirected inward. Bryn, are you hearing it? She blinked, looked at me. It's very quiet, she said. I thought it was the pipes. There are no pipes on the 3rd floor. She nodded, slowly, as though confirming something to herself. I know. That afternoon, something shifted in the quality of the house. Not a sound, not an event. A change in density, in pressure, as though the house had drawn a deep breath and was holding it. Sounds arrived a fraction of a second after they should have, my footsteps on the oak floors slightly delayed, as though each sound were being passed through something before reaching my ears. And the temperature rose. Not uniformly, the kitchen and 1st floor rooms stayed cool. But the 2nd floor grew warm. The hallway outside room 22 warmer still, and the room itself radiated heat like a body, like something with a metabolism, something converting presence into warmth, the way a furnace converts fuel. Bryn came down from the attic and stopped on the 2nd floor landing. Is the furnace doing something? The furnace has been off since yesterday morning. She put her hand on the hallway wall, held it there. Colleen, the wall is warm. I know. The wall is warm, and the furnace is off, and there are no pipes, and I can hear something in the walls that sounds like... She stopped. She pressed both palms against the wall and closed her eyes, and I watched her face change. Watched the tension in her jaw soften. Watched her shoulders drop. Watched the fear dissolve and something else replace it. Something that looked like relief, or recognition, or the particular piece of someone who has been cold for a very long time and has finally found warmth. Bryn. I said her name the way you'd say the name of someone standing too close to the edge of something. Step back. She opened her eyes. The expression lingered for a moment, that peaceful, welcoming warmth. And then her own face reasserted itself. Her own fear returned, and she pulled her hands away from the wall as though it had burned her. She stared at her palms. What was that? She whispered. That's what it does, I said. That's how it works. It doesn't scare you. It comforts you. It makes staying feel like your idea. It makes the room feel like the place you've been looking for your entire life. And then your heart stops, and the house calls the next one. She looked at me. The fracture in her fearlessness had become a crack, and through the crack I could see something I recognized, not terror, but temptation. The terrible, honest temptation of someone who has felt something beautiful and knows it will kill her and is not entirely sure the beauty isn't worth the price. We need to leave, she said. Now. Tonight. What I wanted, what I felt in my body with a certainty that terrified me, precisely because of how natural it felt, was to walk down the hallway and sit in the chair in room 22 and close my eyes and listen. The wanting was warm and steady, a second heartbeat in my chest, and it felt like it had always been there, dormant, waiting for me to arrive at this house so it could finally introduce itself. It didn't feel foreign. That was the horror. It felt like coming home, like finally remembering a song you'd been trying to place for years. like looking in a mirror after a long time and recognizing yourself. And I knew from my aunt's writing, from my uncle's letters, from my grandmother's 36 years of solitary vigilance, that the feeling of rightness was the mechanism. The house didn't trap you with fear. It trapped you with belonging. It offered you the one thing every human being needs, the unconditional sensation of being completely, perfectly, specifically wanted, and it offered it without conditions, without complications, without any of the messy imperfections that make human love both precious and insufficient. It offered you the purest form of home, and the cost was your life. And the worst part was that the cost felt like a bargain. "In the morning," I said. "It's getting dark. I don't want to drive those roads at night." Bryn studied my face. She was looking for the same thing I'd seen in her a moment ago, the temptation, the pull, the warm current beneath the rational surface. She found it. I could tell because her expression changed from fear for herself to fear for me, which is a different kind of fear entirely, quieter and more helpless. "First light," she said. Not a minute later. We ate a sparse dinner: crackers, cheese, apples, the last of what Tomas hadn't packed. We ate in the kitchen and didn't speak much. The house hummed faintly around us, not the full 2:11 a.m. hum, but something lighter, ambient, like background music in a restaurant. Present, but not insistent, as though the house knew we were leaving and had shifted from persuasion to presence, simply reminding us it was there, simply keeping itself warm against the possibility that we might change our minds. At 8 o'clock, Bryn went upstairs to pack. I went to the study. I stood in front of the wall of photographs and looked at the first one, the 1890s couple on the porch of the new house. The wood still pale, the paint not yet applied, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The woman's hand. She was resting it on the porch railing, and her fingers were spread flat against the wood, palm down, in exactly the posture of someone feeling for warmth, feeling for a pulse. The house was 3 years old in that photograph, brand new, and already someone was pressing her hand against it and checking. That night, at 2:11 a.m., the hum came. But not from the walls, not from the hallway, not from room 22 at the end of the corridor. It was in my bedroom, in the air around me, in my pillow, in my ribs. It was immediate and present the way another person's breathing is present when they're lying beside you in the dark. Close enough to feel the warmth of their exhalation. Close enough that your own breathing begins to synchronize without your choosing it. And it was the most comforting sound I have ever heard. More comforting than my daughter's breathing when she falls asleep on my shoulder. More comforting than Lee's voice in the dark after a nightmare. It was comfort refined to its essence, stripped of conditions, reduced to pure physical sensation, the feeling of being completely, unconditionally wanted by something that had no other purpose, no other need, no other thought, except you. I understood my aunt. Lying in the dark with the hum filling me like warm water rising in a glass. I understood why she'd asked to be sealed in. I understood why Paul had driven 3,000 miles to come back. I understood why my grandmother had stayed for 36 years. The house wasn't taking anything from them. It was giving them something. And the gift was so simple and so enormous and so perfectly calibrated to the deepest human hunger that refusing it required a strength I wasn't sure I had. I got out of bed. I walked into the hallway. The floor was warm under my bare feet. The walls were warm. The air was warm. Everything was soft. Everything was welcoming. And room 22 waited at the end of the hallway with its open doorway glowing faintly with a warmth that had no source. And I walked toward it because that was what I wanted. What I had always wanted. What I had been born to want, the daughter of the woman who escaped. The granddaughter of the woman who stayed. The niece of the woman who had given herself completely and called it being full. 4 steps from the doorway, Bryn grabbed my arm. Hard. Hard enough to leave bruises I'd find the next morning in the shape of her fingers. She said my name not gently, not calmly, but in the sharp, severing way you say someone's name when they're about to step into traffic. Colleen. Just that, one word. My name in a human voice. A voice that was afraid for me. A voice carrying all the imperfect, conditional, desperate concern that real love actually sounds like, not the smooth, total, effortless warmth the house was offering, but something rougher, something that included fear and frustration, and the raw, clumsy urgency of a 22-year-old woman standing in a dark hallway fighting the same pull I was fighting and choosing, despite everything, to fight for me instead of surrendering for herself. The sound of my name cut through the hum the way cold water cuts through a dream. I stopped. I looked at her. She was in her pajamas, phone flashlight in her free hand, shaking, not from cold, from effort. I could see the pull in her face, the warmth, the wanting, the invitation, and I could see her refusing it with every part of herself that was young and alive and not ready to be enough. "We're leaving," she said, "right now." I looked at the room, 10 feet away, the warmth radiating from it like a hearth on the coldest night of your life. The hum saying please, the hum saying stay, the hum saying you are what I have been waiting for, and I can make the empty places in you feel like they were never empty at all. "Colleen, your daughter." Nora, 4 years old, asleep in Northampton in a bed with a guardrail, in a house built in 1992 with no history and no wood older than 30 years. Nora, who would inherit this property if I died here. Nora, who would feel the pull the way my aunt had and my uncle had, and I was feeling it now, the long, patient, generational reach of something that had learned to want and had never learned to stop. I turned away from the room. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Not because of fear, because of love. Because refusing the house felt like refusing love. And the body doesn't distinguish between love that nurtures and love that consumes. Both feel warm. Both feel like home. Both say please. We went downstairs. We got in my car. We drove the gravel road in the dark with the headlights cutting through the bare branches reaching overhead. And neither of us spoke. The hum faded gradually. The way a radio station fades when you drive out of range, still there. Still broadcasting, just getting quieter until you can't separate it from the engine noise and the wind. But you know it's still playing. You know that if you turned around, you'd pick it up again, clearer and warmer than before, because the house knows now that you heard it, knows that you almost came in, and the house is patient. The house has always been patient. We reached Northampton at 4 in the morning. I dropped Bryn at her apartment. She got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked at me through the open window. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. It was the most honest answer I'd given anyone in days. She went inside. I sat in the car for a long time, engine running, watching her apartment light come on, then drove home. Lee was asleep. Nora was asleep. The house was quiet with the ordinary, mechanical, indifferent quiet of a building that does not know you and does not want you and does not care whether you stay or leave. I stood in the kitchen and pressed my palms against the wall. Cool. Just drywall. Just paint. Just a wall. A wall with no pulse, no warmth, no memory of my hands. I cried. Not because I was frightened. Because the wall was cool and I missed the warmth, and the missing felt like grief, and the grief felt like proof that something fundamental in me had been altered and might never go back. In the weeks that followed, I did what my mother should have done. I called the attorney and instructed him to demolish the property. Not sell it. Demolish it. Tear it down to the foundation. Then tear the foundation out, then fill the hole with concrete and let the forest take back the land. He told me it would be complicated. The house was potentially eligible for the historical register. There were permits, environmental assessments, a process that could take a year or more. I told him I didn't care. He asked why. I said it was structurally unsafe. He asked for an assessment report. I said I'd provide one. I haven't provided one. It's been over a year. The house is still standing. I know because I check. Not in person, I will not go back, but on satellite images, county databases. Any system that will confirm the property still exists in its current form. I check the way a recovering addict checks to make sure the bar they used to drink at is still across town and hasn't moved closer. I check because checking is the compromise I've made with the part of me that wants to go back, the part that still hums at 2:11 a.m. in a chest that should be quiet, because the wanting didn't stop when I drove away. That's what I need whoever is hearing this to understand. The hum stopped, the warmth stopped, but the wanting remained a residue, a stain that bleaches out of the fabric but never quite leaves the fiber. It's in my chest at 2:11 every morning when I wake and lie in the dark for exactly 14 minutes before I can sleep again. It's in the way I feel about rooms, about walls, about the temperature of surfaces my hands touch. It's in the way I sometimes walk through my own home in Northampton and feel that every room is wrong, too cold, too indifferent, too empty of whatever the Merrifield house was full of. It's in the way I sold my renovation business 3 months after coming home, because I couldn't enter other people's houses anymore without pressing my palm to their walls, without listening for the hum, without wondering whether every old house carries the same need, and I simply couldn't hear it before the Merrifield house opened my ears. Lee knows something is wrong. She knows about the waking, the business sale, the way I stand in Nora's doorway at night watching her sleep with an intensity that looks more like surveillance than tenderness. She's asked. I've given her the same useless answers I gave her at the beginning. I'm fine. I'm tired. I'm adjusting. She deserves better than that. She deserves the truth. But the truth is a house that says, please, with a voice made of warmth. And I don't know how to explain that to someone who has never felt it without sounding like I've lost my mind. And maybe I have. But what I lost doesn't feel like sanity. It feels like immunity. It feels like the thing that used to stand between me and a need I didn't know I had has been removed. And now the need is visible, and it is everywhere. And it is dressed in the same clothes as love. Last week I was giving Nora a bath. She was playing with her toys, happy, ordinary, a 4-year-old in warm water making the small, contented sounds that children make when the world is exactly the right temperature. And she started humming. Children hum. It means nothing. Children hum because they're happy and because bathrooms have good acoustics and because they're 4 and the world is still a song they haven't learned the words to. But the pattern she was humming, the rise and fall, the cadence, the emotional shape of it, I recognized it. Not the melody, the architecture, the questions, the reassurances, the requests, the sound of something saying please in a language that isn't language. I went very still. Nora, where did you hear that song? She looked up at me with the clear, untroubled eyes of a child who doesn't understand why an adult would ask a strange question about a simple thing. The house sings it, she said. What house? Our house, she said. And she went back to her toys. I sat on the tile floor and pressed my back against the cool bathroom wall and closed my eyes and listened to my daughter hum the sound that killed my aunt and my uncle, and that my grandmother spent 36 years trying to contain. And I understood, finally, completely, what the house was. Not a haunting, not a curse, not a malevolent force. A home. A home that had been built to be lived in and had been lived in so thoroughly and so long that it had learned the one thing that makes a home something more than a structure. How to miss the people who leave. It missed us. It missed us the way a parent misses a child who has moved away. It missed us with a need that was pure and total and patient and absolutely, fundamentally incompatible with our survival. Because it loved too much. Because its love was not the imperfect, bounded, survivable love that humans give each other. The love that includes distance and boundaries and the willingness to let go, but something else, something architectural, something that had been built without a threshold, without a limit, without any mechanism for enough. It loved the way a house holds heat completely, uniformly, without discrimination, without restraint, without any understanding that what it holds might need to leave in order to stay alive. And it had found Nora, not through me, through itself, through the hum, which was not contained by walls or distance or the number of miles between Ashfield and Northampton, through whatever channel my aunt had described when she wrote that Paul could hear it in California, through the connection that the house had built with my family over a century of habitation, a connection that ran through blood and memory, and the particular genetic frequency of people who had been born inside it and had carried its resonance out into the world like seeds. Nora was humming in our bathtub, in a house built in 1992, 67 miles from Ashfield, and the sound she was making was the sound the Merrifield house makes at 2:11 a.m., the sound that says please, the sound that my grandmother listened to for 36 years, the sound that stopped my aunt's heart and my uncle's heart, and that I can still feel in my chest when I lie awake in the dark and count the minutes. I don't know what to do. I need that to be clear. I am not telling this story because I have an answer. I am telling it because my mother chose silence, and silence didn't work. She erased the house from our family history, and the house found us anyway, because you cannot make a home forget you by forgetting it. You can only delay the remembering. I don't know how to protect my daughter from something that sounds like love. I don't know how to explain to a 4-year-old that the song she's humming is not a song, and the house she's hearing is not our house, and the warmth she's feeling is not safe. I don't know how to destroy a building that has already outgrown its walls, and I don't know how to stop wanting to go back, because the wanting is made of the same material as every good thing I've ever felt, the same warmth, the same belonging, the same desperate, beautiful, killing need to be home. I don't know how to fight something that only knows how to love you. I don't know that it can be fought. I don't know that I want to.